in week 4 of our summer-long series, Start the Party. And so for this series, we're talking about what? Do you guys remember? Party starters and parties, Jesus, yes. How to start the party. What party are we talking about? Church, the party following Jesus. Great Sunday school answers. We're reading, the main verse is from John, where Jesus talks about, I have come so that you may have abundant life. Yes, and have it to the full. So that's what we've been talking about. And this week, this is going to be really important because it has something to do with all of us. It can change our relationships, our small groups, our friendships. It can change everything about the way we interact with people, our student ministry as a whole. And so it's going to be really good. So hopefully you're here and you're with me because this is going to be straight facts today. So when I was in middle school, I remember being in 8th grade and 7th grade too, but mostly 8th grade, and having a hard time because I played basketball a lot growing up. And like when I was younger, I was like one of the best players, pretty cool. And then it got to like 7th and 8th grade and I sat the bench a lot. And so I felt like I had like gone backwards. And I felt like I remember one game in particular, we were playing in my hometown at a rival school, and we always lost. But this time it was close, and the score was close. We did end up actually winning, but bless you. But I remember sitting on the bench the whole game, thinking maybe he'll send me in now. Maybe he'll send me in now, because we were neck and neck, and I was like, I know I can make a difference. Send me in now, coach. And I sat the bench the entire game. The entire game. I remember being really excited that we actually won, but really disappointed I couldn't be a part of it. And it was pretty terrible. It was one of those things. It was one of those situations that I felt like, should I even keep playing basketball? Should I keep even wasting my time coming to practices? Maybe when I get into high school, I should just drop the sport altogether. Even though I loved it, it was my favorite thing to do. At that age, I was still like, I'm going to be in the NBA someday, And, well, that didn't happen. But it was one of those things that, it was tough. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you've been in a spot. Maybe it wasn't basketball, but it was somewhere where you felt like you didn't have any value. Like you didn't make a difference. Like, would anybody even care if you weren't there? Maybe you've been there. Maybe you haven't. Maybe you've been through some tough times. And when we kicked off this series, we looked at the promise that Jesus made that if we follow him, he will give us abundant life. And maybe some of you, if you've been a Christ follower for a while and you've noticed that sometimes life still isn't perfect. And it can beg the question, what is this abundant life that Jesus has to offer? And so we've been talking about what it means to start the party. And a party, just to review for definition for you new 5th graders, a party is any effort to celebrate, serve, or enjoy others in a way that adds value to life. And we talk about how us as Jesus followers, we are the party starters. We are the people that bring the hope, that bring the joy, that bring all the stuff that Jesus promised. And so a party starter is this. There we go. A party starter is being someone who tries to make that happen however they can. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about party starters and party. So if I can just be real with you, sometimes when it comes to just everyday life, being the party starter is just a lot easier when life is going great, right? When you're the one sitting the bench, or when you're the one going through a hard time and whatever it is, it's hard to be the one to start the party because you don't feel in a party mood yourself. Is that fair? So how do we be that person? How do we be the party starter who brings the life and joy and peace and happiness wherever you go? How do you start that and bring that abundant life when life doesn't feel all that abundant to you? How do we do this? But if part of being a party starter means showing up for others and bringing that hope for others, then I think it's possible. Because the reality is, all of us are going to go through times where life doesn't feel like a party. But all of us, every one of us, we're not designed to go through life alone. We need people with us. We need people who will remind us of what's true when life doesn't feel like the abundant life Jesus promised is a real thing. We need people to remind us of the promises that God has given us. We need people to be there with us in the midst of our storms and not just on the outside looking in and waving at you and moving on, right? We need true community. And so what the abundant life has to promise is because Jesus left us with the church and his spirit inside of all of us. So no matter what challenge that somebody's facing, or no matter how they're struggling, or whether or not we're unsure of how to help, the right thing to say or whatever, or even if we understand what they're going through or not, how do we still be the party starter for somebody else? Maybe somebody who's going through that difficult time. For those of you who've gone through hard times, you know what that's like. You know how valuable it is to have somebody who is in your corner, who's there with you. So the good news is knowing how to relate to other people in their struggles and in their challenges is something that has been a lifelong, humanity-long thing that's been going on. How do you show up for people in their funk when they're not feeling great, when the party doesn't feel like particularly easy to start? How do you do that? It's not a new problem, and there's been lots of people in pain and going through hard times throughout history, but God has always had a plan. He's always had a plan to provide a way. And back in Bible times, God's chosen people, they had been promised, the Israelites, they'd been promised for centuries, for generations, of a coming Messiah. They'd been promised that God was going to deliver them. You guys remember the story in Exodus where the Israelites were slaves to the Egyptians, and God heard their cries, and he went to fulfill their promise? Actually, their slavery was predicted earlier in the Bible. Did you know that? But then God comes on, and he comes on the scene. He uses Moses to deliver them. If you've seen The Prince of Egypt, that little cartoon that came out like way before your guys' time when I was a kid, then you remember the song, "Let my people go." Do you guys remember? Anyway, you should go watch it because it still holds up. Thank you. It's good. So, but at that time, God shows up, he delivers them, and eventually they make their way to the promised land. And then God promised, you know what? The plan from the beginning, the promised land is good, but this life, this world, is not your home. Right? Right now, I've blessed you so that you can be a blessing to the nations around you, to those who don't have that hope, so that you can be the party starter. Right? And if you've been in church any period of time, you know the story. They weren't particularly good at that. They failed a lot. They became selfish. They focused on themselves. They felt entitled. They didn't help other people. So Jesus comes on the scene, and he fulfills what they couldn't. But in the midst of their despair, when they were waiting for this Messiah, when they were waiting for God to show up and deliver on his promise, maybe you can relate to that. Maybe you've been in a place where you're like, God, when are you showing up? When are you going to change things around? This is what happens. In their struggles, the people are waiting for this Messiah to show up. And then God showed up through Jesus. He sends the Messiah, and he comes in human form. And this was announced long ago by a prophet. This is what he says in Matthew chapter 1, verse 23, recounting what this prophet said. It said, look, the virgin will conceive a child. She will give birth to a son, and they will call him what? Emmanuel, which means God is with us, okay? Now, this may sound a little out of place because this is usually a verse that we read in December around Christmas time. But this truth is true all year long. Now, Emmanuel does not mean God makes us feel better. It does not mean God fixes us. It does not mean God solves all my problems. Right? Sometimes God does that. But Emmanuel means what? God with us. That's a little bit of a difference. Think about it this way. You guys have something that you use that comforts you? Like comfort food, maybe? Or a stuffed animal? Or maybe when you were younger, or some kind of toy or something that you go to that brings you comfort when you are struggling. Like for me, when I was younger, and even still today, whenever I'm struggling or going through a hard time, I find that if I just sit down with my guitar and just spend some time with it and just turn off the noise, take out the headphones, get in a quiet place, and if I just kind of strum and noodle around, and maybe I'll play some familiar songs that brings comfort to me. A lot of times it's a worship song. Sometimes it's a Switchfoot song. And I'll just play music and it soothes my soul and it brings me comfort and it reminds me that, no matter what's going on, truth is still truth. God is still with me. And I don't know what it is for you, but we all tend to find something that brings us comfort in our darkest moments. And what God says to us when he sends his son, when he sends this Messiah that's supposed to be the solution for everything, that brings abundant life, he doesn't give him a name to us that means miracle genie, all problems gone. He gives him a name that means, hey, you know what? I'm with you. I'm in this with you. I feel your pain. I feel your suffering. I know what you're going through. I am with you. And he promises to be with us. He promises that when we live an abundant life that is lived out by living through the Spirit that God has given to us by our belief in him, that we can have an abundant life. We can have peace. We can have joy. We can have hope regardless of our circumstances. And that's something that the younger you learn that, the better off you will be for the long term. Because unfortunately, what a lot of people do is they assume God is just a magical genie that's going to solve all our problems. And then hard things happen, and then it shakes their faith. I don't want that for you. So, most importantly, when God is with us, he's with us through his Spirit that lives inside of us. He's also with us through his word. But he's also with us through the people he's placed in our lives. Our fellow believers, our community centered around Christ. Right? Church is the intersection where all those people come together each week. Right? That's why it's important to be here, but it's also why it's important to invest in those relationships. Okay? Here's what a real party starter does. They show up to be with others in their difficulties. They don't show up to fix everybody's problems, so you don't have to put that pressure on yourself. But they show up to be with the hurting, those who are going through difficult times. They're there to be there to celebrate with you. They're there for all of it. That's what you need in life. When our friends are struggling, when the people in our lives are suffering, when our loved ones experience heartbreak, pain, and loss, we don't have to wonder what to do. Because when we follow God's lead and just simply show up, here's what's true. Sometimes when someone's going through a hard time, they'll remember word for word what somebody says. But that's rare. Most of the time, what they remember is how you make them feel. Okay? You know how I know this? Is because 2 months from now, a month from now, maybe next week, maybe tomorrow, you're not going to remember what I talked about up here. Hopefully you remember that I made you feel loved and that there's hope in this life, even when we struggle, but you're not going to remember what I said. You'll remember more how I make you feel. And that brings me comfort and disappointment because, that is just reality. And here's the thing. When someone's going through a hard time, they don't necessarily need you to fix their problems. In fact, sometimes it can be less helpful if you were to solve their problem. What's more helpful is for you to sit there and be with them. Your presence speaks 1,000 words. And so a party starter shows up. They show up to be with others in their difficulties. Doing that means showing empathy. You guys heard that word? Probably some of you older have, but those of you younger, empathy is different than sympathy, right? Empathy is the ability to understand and share in what other people are feeling. It's the ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, right? And that's really hard for a lot of reasons. Like a lot of times we just kind of focus on our perspective, and it actually takes an extra step of mental work to put yourself in their situation and think about it from their point of view. And so that's what empathy is. It's the ability to understand and share in what other people are feeling. In other words, it helps them carry the load. And that's what a party starter does. They show up to be with others in their difficulties. You don't have to have all the right answers. But if you're there with them, again, your presence speaks 1,000 words. I told you I was really struggling my 7th and 8th grade years when I sat on the bench a lot playing basketball. Felt like I shouldn't even do it anymore. I almost quit, but I stuck with it because I do enjoy it. And I enjoyed the community of, my brethren on the team. And you know what? I was at a small school. A lot of people who were doing it in middle school stopped doing it. By high school, new people joined, and the team shifted a lot. And by the time I was in high school, I got more playing time again. My underclassmen years, I played mostly on JV. And then by my junior, senior year, I was playing varsity, and I got a lot of playing time. And it's because I stuck with it. And sometimes in life, you just got to stick with it. You got to stick with things, and you got to stick with people. A party starter shows up to be with others in their difficulties. So, a couple things that you can do is, one, just notice when others are struggling. Again, this is where empathy comes in. You got to put yourself in other people's shoes. Do you know somebody who seems to always be having a bad day? Maybe you know something that's going on in their personal life. Notice when people are struggling. You're not going to be able to help people very much if you're not intentionally looking to see where you can help people. So notice where others are struggling. Then care about what they're going through. Maybe you know nothing about the situation they're in. Maybe their parents are getting divorced and your parents are together and you can't relate to what they're feeling. But maybe they just lost a friend and you've never lost anybody. You can't relate to what they're feeling. Whatever it is, learn what it is that's going on in their life and then show care to them. Show up and be there with them. It's okay even to say, man, I really can't relate what that feels like, but I'm here for you. That must be really hard. And that speaks 1,000 words. Your presence, your ability to show up and care about what they're going through says a lot. If you think back to a time when you were struggling, there was another time when I was in high school. My dad lost his job. There was a possibility we were going to move from my hometown, which I had grown up at, which all my friends were there. And I was 2 years away from graduating. And the amount of people that put their hand on my shoulder and just prayed with me or showed that they cared about me, said, man, I'm praying that God finds a solution somewhere local so that you don't have to move anywhere. Like, that just meant so much. That got me through. It helped me know that even if I did move, at least there were people that cared. Right? There's ways that you can just show up in other people's life, care about what they're going through, and just sit with them. Right? So show up in people's lives. And that's how you can help share their difficulty, but it's also how you can learn to find people that will share your difficulty when you go through a hard time. So build your community. Build your foundation on Christ, and that includes the people that he's put in your life that are also following him. When we do this right, it changes our relationships. It changes our family dynamics. It changes our schools. It'll change the way this youth group feels. It'll change your small group. This has the potential to change a lot of things. And so I want you to be thinking about, as you go to your small group, what's one way that you can show up for someone else this week? Maybe you have someone in mind that you've been thinking about. Maybe you just need to pray about it and ask for God to reveal somebody that you can show up for. But think about what's going on this week. What's one way that you could show up for someone else this week? I want you to think about that. I'm going to pray, and then you'll go to your small groups, and then we'll be done for the day.